Well, what's up again there, guys? Brian here, the 3 Topics Gamer, here to give you another one of my top 5 list videos to share with you guys today. Which, surprisingly, now that I've actually looked back, I actually haven't done a top 5 list in some time. But thanks to some of you guys' great ideas, we're back on track. So for this particular video, I will be going over my personal top 5 favorite comic book video games. So before I get into my list, if you do happen to enjoy this video by the end, please, I would really appreciate it if you could give this video a thumbs up, as well as be sure to smash that subscribe button if you happen to enjoy content like this from me and would like to see more from me moving forward. So without wasting any more time, let's jump right into my list, and we shall start off with number 5. When it comes to the number 5 spot on my list, I'm going to have to cheat a little bit, and instead of picking just one game, I'm going to have to pick 2, and those 2 games are the 2 Injustice games. Now, I'm not the biggest fighting game fan, and there's a very few fighting games that I actually enjoy playing, so when I'm not playing Mortal Kombat, I'm absolutely playing one of these 2 games. Now, there are also a number of advantages that helps Injustice get on this list. For one, it is just an overall great fighting game, and the fact that it's also developed by NetherRealm Studios, they just know how to make great fighting games, and they do enough that Mortal Kombat and Injustice are very similar in some cases, but do have some very distinctive gameplay elements that helps give each of these games its own unique identity. Number 2 is the fact that these games also have really great storylines. One is an alternate timeline story, and the other one is a little bit more traditional. But they both work in very unique, different ways. And the fact that there's a whole comic book series that actually fills in the gap between these 2 games, or really since events that actually happened before at least the first game at least, is also very helpful. And also the rosters. These have some very great rosters of characters that even I'm not the biggest fan of, but really enjoy playing as. And the final point that I really would like to point out here is the fact that the Injustice games do a very great job of just being fun to play online. And I'm not the biggest online gaming fan also, but heck, I do love playing these games online against opponents and friends. And that's something that Injustice has over a lot of other fighting games that I also enjoy playing. But when it comes to just strictly comic book video games, that is why Injustice 1 and 2 will have to take the number 5 spot on my list. Number 4 on my list will have to go to Deadpool the video game, which came out all the way back in 2013, long before the first Deadpool movie was even released. And out of all of the games on this list, I believe that this is one of the easiest to simply pick up and start having fun right from the very beginning. The story itself really lacks any good amount of depth, and at times certainly does go all over the place and has no sense of direction, but that's what Deadpool is all about. He's the merc with the mouth who simply enjoys going all around killing everyone and everything in sight, and the gameplay's straightforward action-adventure beat-em-up style of gameplay really works with that kind of character. Now, it's also great to see Deadpool interact with other noticeable Marvel characters associated with the X-Men, along with Deadpool occasionally breaking the fourth wall and talking us directly to help get us in on the joke. And at times, the game's narrator actually goes out of his way to explain the craziness of why things are the way they are, which helps makes the game be very self-aware of what kind of game it's trying to be, and that alone helps Deadpool really stand out on this list. If there's any real flaw this game has in my personal experience, it would have to be that some of the level structure and some of the sections can make the platforming element really frustrating at times, and there's a serious lack of creativity when it comes to the enemies. But that doesn't hold this game back from providing an overall enjoyable experience from beginning to end, which is what makes it very worthy of holding the number 4 spot on my list. Number 3 on my list will have to go to X-Men Origins Wolverine. This is one of the best examples of a movie-based video game that has very little in common with the film it's based on, and because of that becomes far better than it has any right to be. Now, to its core, to anyone that has actually played this game, they will tell you right from the beginning that this is a God of War clone, plain and simple. But just like other God of War clone games like Dante's Inferno or Castlevania Lord of Shadows or even Heavenly Sword, I believe that X-Men Origins Wolverine does do enough to allow it to stand out on its own. Now, when it comes to the game's story, while it does repeat some scenes from the actual film itself, most of its story is very much focused on telling its own unique story, and that's something that really makes me appreciate this game. The combat is very familiar and easy to use, the upgrade system is very straightforward, and even some of the visuals for its time are quite impressive to me even to this day. One little attention to detail that some of you might miss is that the more damage that you take, the more messed up Wolverine gets. And as your healing factor kicks in, you can actively see Wolverine's body begin to heal up. And that's something that I've never actually seen in any other X-Men game that included a Wolverine. This game also includes some really impressive boss fights spread throughout, with my personal favorite being Wolverine's fight against the Sentinel. And when you finally finish this game, you actually can go back and change Wolverine's costume to be more classic. Now, there have been many great X-Men games to come out over the years, but out of all of them, this one is certainly my favorite solo X-Men game. So if you still have your PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360 or have any way of playing this game, I would absolutely recommend you go out of your way to try and play it. Number 2 on my list will have to go to 2018's Marvel's Spider-Man, exclusively for the PlayStation. Now, I will just come out and say it right now. This game is without question not only the greatest Spider-Man game ever developed, but it is easily the greatest comic book video game ever created. This game provides amazing performances from all of the cast members that are playing fully realized and in-depth characters that are all given a purpose for being here, with gameplay that is so fun, responsive, and grants you a great deal of options on how to dispatch your enemies. And the swinging in this game is simply incredible and addicting, to the point that it helps make the web swinging in this game my favorite form of transportation within any open sandbox title game that I've ever played. With boss fights spread throughout the entire game that are all unique and challenging in their own way. And what makes this game stand out amongst any other game on this list is that this game is unquestionably the most fun to play. It even came with a recent expansion in the form of Spider-Man Miles Morales that was just as enjoyable and just made my overall experience even more memorable. Now, I may consider the Dark Knight to be my overall favorite superhero of all time, but there is simply no denying that it would be a lot more fun being Spider-Man. The only thing that holds this game back from taking the number 1 spot on this list is the fact that this game brought very little to the long history of Spider-Man games that hasn't already been done before. When you take into account games like 2004 Spider-Man 2, Web of Shadows, Shattered Dimensions, and several other Spider-Man games, it took a lot of things from those games and simply put them into one package. And while that in itself is not bad at all, the number 1 spot game on this list did something that I can't even say this game has been able to do. Taking the number 1 spot in the game that will forever hold the title of being my favorite comic book video game of all time will always be Batman Arkham Asylum. Now, I openly recognize that many would say that Arkham City is a better game, and I openly concede that Marvel's Spider-Man is an overall better game, but the one thing that this game has over Marvel's Spider-Man is the fact that this game not only changed comic book video games, but it affected an entire genre of games. I have played many games over the past decade that I can clearly see took inspiration from the Arkham Asylum game. Before Marvel's Spider-Man game, there had already been a long list of great Spider-Man games, but before Arkham Asylum, we had never had a game that was like this before. And while games like Arkham City and Arkham Origins and Arkham Knight certainly did improve upon what Arkham Asylum started, what Arkham Asylum has over all of those other games is that it has a better sense of focus. Now, because the rest of the Arkham games put a lot of effort into wanting to make those games even bigger and better than Arkham Asylum was, then the margin for error was certainly increased, and because of that, there are a number of major flaws that are in all of those games that were never presented in Arkham Asylum. And out of all of the Arkham games that have been developed, Arkham Asylum is the only one to get the purpose of what Arkham Asylum is meant to be. Origins and Knight have literally almost nothing to do with the concept of Arkham, and when it comes to City, even after reading the comic books, I still find it hard to believe that the city would willfully want to cut a section of the city off just to contain its criminals. This game is not just a member of my legendary 10 out of 10 club, along with being my favorite comic book video game of all time, but it is one of the most influential games of all time, which is more than enough reason to grant it the number 1 spot on my list. And now I'll do it for my personal top 5 favorite comic book video games. Now that you guys know my list, I would like to know what are some of your guys' favorite comic book video games. Share your list with me and everyone else in the comments down below. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I will see you next time.